So now that I went through and I blended everything, I also decided that it would be a lot more fun if my highlight color was a little bit more vivid. So I actually found like a shimmery turquoise eyeshadow that I had, and I added that on top of it. This in here is still kind of that like shimmery, like lightish, like champagne shade, just so that way this stays nice and bright. But in here I decided to make it turquoise. I feel like that's much more 80s, much more fun. And again, when you're playing with fun 80s makeup, there's really not many rules that you have to follow, so I figured why not. And I also chose to kind of like pull it back a little bit. I was careful that it didn't get too low onto here though, remember, just so that way it doesn't look like an under eye circle, just because when you're playing with like blue and purple and greens, it can really quickly like turn into sort of like an under eye circle issue. So you want to make sure that you're not adding shadows in the wrong places, but you can still play with fun color. So we've got everything. We've got pink, turquoise, purple, shimmery turquoise, and then I just added like a little bit more of my blush to kind of help it all pull back. And then I lined underneath and on top of my eyes with black. I feel like I'm channeling more of like a Madonna kind of a look for the 80s with a little bit of like Cyndi Lauper color thrown in. And I feel like Madonna did a lot of like that kind of like heavy eyeliner look. So that's why we kind of decided to go with that. So the next thing we're going to do is talk about brows. So I think Madonna is actually another great one to talk about as far as brows are concerned in the 1980s. She had very like thick, like natural brows, and that was really what was trendy. Thanks to like her, Brooke Shields. Just a lot of people were going like a little bit more natural with it, especially compared to like what we're about to see in the 90s, which is more just like less than what I have naturally, which is not much eyebrow, which is scary. So what we're going to do with this is I'm going to pencil them in how I normally would. And again, remember I like to do the center first, then I do the end of it, and then I do the front of it, just so that way it doesn't get too heavy up here. But with my eyebrows, since like I am missing hair in some places, I'm going to have to draw them in to get them like a little bit more into this like bushy shape that Madonna was kind of famous for. It's a great time to not worry about like plucking your eyebrows, because you can see in like a lot of photos of her, she had a lot of like extra eyebrow hair in here that a lot of us, myself included, pluck away. So if you want, you can even go so far as to like add those in, but I'm just going to pencil it in a little bit thicker, and then I'm going to actually use like a clear brow gel to kind of like flatten them up so that they just look a little bit larger than what they actually are. So my first step is just going to be to go ahead and just pencil them in, kind of like how I always would. I like to start with them just like sort of in their normal shape first, and then I kind of do like whatever the period or like character shape is, just so that way I always have like a base that frames it out, and I don't get like confused right away. So I'm gonna go ahead and again remember that is like doing it right from the center, and then I always pull it out. So I like to do it in like smaller strokes. I don't necessarily worry too much about drawing in like individual hairs if I'm just like filling in my regular eyebrow. But if that is what you like to do, especially for this time period, that would be perfectly appropriate. I usually use a pencil. I think as long as you're not trying to draw in individual hairs, you could do like a powder as well. But if you are trying to draw in physical hairs, it can be really hard to do that unless you have like a pencil or like a pomade or something like that. But you all have your Ben Nye pencils in your kit, so you should be able to kind of make it work. Okay, so now that I kind of have like my basic eyebrow shape, which gives me much more eyebrows, so we're already in a much better place. I'm gonna go ahead and I'm just gonna kind of like exaggerate it like a little bit in the front, and I might draw it like a little bit further forward, and the hair is like a little bit taller than what I would normally wear. So I feel like when I'm at this point with my eyebrows, like I probably look like absolutely crazy, especially like I do my makeup on the train, so I can only imagine like when I'm sitting there like this, what these people might think that it's going to turn into. But really I think it's like one of those things, just like a lot of times I talk about with like my eye makeup too, like I always go back and I blend it out. So just worry about like getting it on your face, and then you can go back and make it not a square in like a second, right? But it's just always easier if you just kind of like map it out for yourself first, and then you go back and kind of like perfect it the way that you want. So I'm going to fill in this a little bit lower than what I normally would, just because I don't necessarily like the super thick brows on myself, but this isn't about me, it's about the 1980s. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to do the eyebrows, and we're going to love it, and it's going to be great. I'm just going to like pull it out down and down how I normally do. So now that I'm at this point, probably at a good point to start blending it before it gets like too out of hand. And so I'm going to use that same kind of highlight color that I use like elsewhere, so not the turquoisey one, so I might have to go back in and apply more of the turquoise if I cover any of that up, but to carve it out in the front, especially where I don't have any of that turquoise, I'm just going to use this more natural highlight color, and I'm just going to go in and just move the brush back and forth just to kind of like soften it a little bit. So we'll just use the camera, and we'll use mirrors, we'll use everything. And then this is going to help me still have like the definition, but it's like a little bit softer. And if you do look at like Madonna's brows, like she has like larger eyebrows like in the 80s, but they're still like soft. So you don't necessarily have to have like big square like blocky eyebrows for this. You can still like have the shape, but it's like a softer sort of a shape to it. And so that's why I do like to go in and kind of like buff it back out when I do this. And then if I feel like, oh, I like lost some of the turquoise, I can kind of come in and tap that in there. And make sure that I don't lose any of the color that I put in. So at this point, I would say that's a pretty good shape as far as like my 80s brows are concerned. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to put a little bit of clear brow gel in it. So for anything else, that's just going to help like set your brows in place. It's going to help set like the product that you use on them in place. And for this, it's going to help us kind of like style them upwards a little bit so that they look a little bit larger. So if this is your personal one, you can just use this directly. This is not my personal one. This is from my kit. So I'm not going to use that wand directly. I'm going to use a disposable wand. And remember, just like mascara, like we talked about in class, you have to use a new wand every single time you dip into it. So it does not matter if it is going back on the same eye on the same person. Every time it touches somebody's eye or my eyebrows, whatever it is, like this wand does not go back in that tube. It just gets thrown out. You might go through a lot of them. That does not matter. They are not that expensive. It is not worth like somebody like getting pink eye or like an eye infection or something over. So please just always, anytime you dip into it, if it is not your personal one, it has to be a new wand. And that is so important. So when you're doing this, I'm just literally going to take it and I'm just going to like brush my hair up directly. So I don't have like the longest eyebrow hair in the world, so this doesn't work super effectively on me. But it does make a difference. And if you have too much of the brow gel on it, sometimes it can smear your eye makeup, so just be careful that you don't have it too intense. But this is just going to kind of help give them that sort of like fluffier look that was a little trendier in the 80s. And so just be careful if you're someone like me and you don't have all of the hair that you tried to grow in, because this is going to make it, or to draw in, I mean, this is going to make it kind of obvious that you don't. So in areas like that, I'm probably not going to like fan my hair out quite as much. Just because we can't let everyone know our secrets that we have no eyebrow hair. So it's going to help us keep the secret a little bit longer, right? But you can kind of see it like up close. It's harder to tell, but it does just kind of help it make it look like a little bit fluffier. So if you were doing both of your eyebrows, obviously you'd go through and do this on each brow. I am not. So the only things we have to do on this side, I'll add more mascara at the end. And then we will do both sides of our lips. We're gonna have two different lip colors this time, so that's gonna be very interesting. But we're gonna go ahead and move on to the 90s side.